American Airlines Flight 191, May 25, 1979. At Chicago O'Hare, American Airlines Flight 191 prepared for takeoff to Los Angeles. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas DC-10 carrying 271 people. As it accelerated down the runway and began to climb, disaster struck. The left engine separated completely from the wing. Faulty maintenance procedures had weakened the pylon attaching it, and the stress finally tore it away. All 271 people on board, plus 2 on the ground, were killed instantly. At the time, it was the deadliest aviation disaster in U.S. history. The crash sparked a nationwide grounding of the DC-10 and raised serious questions about airline maintenance practices. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 163. On August 19, 1980, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar lifted off from Riyadh on a short domestic flight. But within minutes, smoke alarms began sounding in the cabin. A fire had broken out in the rear cargo hold. The crew turned back and managed to land the plane safely. But what happened next turned survival into tragedy. Instead of stopping immediately and evacuating, the pilots taxied the aircraft for several minutes, unsure of the fire's severity. By the time the engines were shut down, the blaze had already consumed the cabin. Rescue crews opened the doors, only to find a horrific scene. Every passenger and crew member, 301 people in total, had died, most from smoke inhalation. Not one person made it out alive. Investigators concluded that the crew had underestimated the urgency of the fire, and evacuation procedures were tragically delayed. The accident changed the way crews are trained to handle in-flight fires. Once smoke is detected, landing and evacuation must be immediate. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. March 3, 1974. Turkish Airlines. Flight 981, a DC-10, departed Paris bound for London with 346 people on board. Only minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft climbed above 20,000 feet, a hidden flaw revealed itself. The DC-10's rear cargo door, poorly designed and not properly latched, suddenly blew open. The decompression was so violent that part of the passenger cabin floor was ripped away, taking seats and passengers with it. But even worse, the cables that controlled the elevators and rudder were routed beneath the floor. The pilots tried desperately to regain control, but the jet nosedived at nearly the speed of sound before slamming into the Ermenonville forest outside Paris. There were no survivors. What shocked investigators was that the problem had already been identified. Just 2 years earlier, another DC-10 had nearly suffered the same fate, but the manufacturer, McDonnell Douglas, had resisted expensive design changes. Flight 981 forced the aviation industry to confront the dangers of ignoring known defects. 346 lives were lost because of shortcuts. Before we continue exploring the worst air disasters in history, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps the channel grow and allows me to keep creating powerful, in-depth stories like this one. Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision. On the evening of November 12, 1996, the skies over northern India were clear, but inside Delhi's crowded airspace, a silent danger was unfolding. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763, a Boeing 747, had just departed New Delhi, climbing through 14,000 feet. At the same time, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907, an Ilyushin Il-76 cargo jet, was descending into the same air corridor. Controllers instructed the Kazakh crew to hold at 15,000 feet, but language barriers and cockpit miscommunication caused the pilots to descend lower. The two aircraft were now on a collision course. At 6:40 p.m., in the skies above the village of Charkhi Dadri, the unthinkable happened. The nose of the Saudi 747 sliced through the Kazakh jet. The Saudi plane exploded instantly. The Kazakh jet broke apart, its fuselage crashing down into fields. Villagers ran outside, only to find burning wreckage and bodies scattered across the countryside. All 349 passengers and crew from both flights were killed. It remains the deadliest mid-air collision in history. In the aftermath, India required all planes in its airspace to carry traffic collision avoidance systems, a rule that later spread worldwide. Japan Airlines Flight 123, August 12, 1985. Japan's skies turned into a nightmare. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747-SR, took off from Tokyo's Haneda Airport at 6:12 p.m., bound for Osaka. There were 524 people on board, making it one of the most heavily loaded domestic flights in history. Just 12 minutes later, passengers heard a deafening boom. Years earlier, the same plane had suffered a tail strike. Boeing repaired it, but the job was done incorrectly, leaving a hidden weakness. That weakness gave way mid-flight, rupturing the rear pressure bulkhead. The explosive decompression tore off the vertical stabilizer and destroyed all 4 hydraulic systems. The 747 was nearly uncontrollable. The pilots could no longer move the rudder, ailerons, or elevators. Their only tools were the engines. For 32 agonizing minutes, the crew fought to keep the aircraft stable. The plane swayed wildly, climbing, diving, and banking, while passengers clung to their seats. Oxygen masks dangled. Families wrote final messages on scraps of paper, aware of what was coming. One note later, recovered, read simply, "I lived a full life. Goodbye." At 6:56 p.m., the aircraft slammed into Mount Takamagahara at over 300 miles per hour. Of the 524 on board, 520 died instantly. Miraculously, 4 passengers survived, clinging to life until rescuers arrived hours later. Flight 123 remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in history. The investigation exposed flaws in repair oversight and inspired stricter maintenance checks worldwide. Tenerife Airport disaster. March 27, 1977. What began as an ordinary day on the Canary Islands would turn into the darkest day in aviation history. A terrorist bombing at Gran Canaria Airport had forced many flights to divert to a much smaller, less equipped airfield. Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife. An airport designed for small traffic suddenly overwhelmed. 2 of those diverted planes were Boeing 747s, one from Pan American World Airways and another from KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. As the hours dragged on, fog rolled in, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Controllers in the tiny tower could barely see the tarmac. Inside the cockpit of the KLM jet was Captain Jacob Van Zanten, one of the company's most senior pilots. Under pressure from delays and eager to take off, he misunderstood a clearance message from air traffic control. Believing he was cleared for departure, he pushed the throttles forward and began roaring down the fog-covered runway. At the same time, the Pan Am 747 was still taxiing on that very runway, trying to locate the correct exit. The 2 giants never saw each other until it was too late. At 160 miles per hour, the KLM jet slammed into the Pan Am aircraft. The impact created a massive fireball that consumed both planes. In all, 583 people died. Only a handful survived by leaping from the Pan Am's wreckage before it was swallowed by flames. Investigators concluded that poor communication, pressure on the captain, and the airport's inadequate infrastructure had all combined to create this catastrophe. Tenerife remains the deadliest aviation accident of all time. These disasters changed aviation forever, forcing new rules, safer designs, and better training. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps the channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you in-depth stories about the moments that shaped our world.